Good day, dental professionals. You're tuned in to the Dental Flow podcast, dentistry's go-to resource for insights into the business side of dentistry. Host Benjamin Suggs navigates you through the currents of the ever-changing dental waters. This podcast is packed with innovative practice growth strategies, insights, and expert advice tailored to help increase the flow of new, profitable patients into dental practices. Listen as Ben explores the latest trends, shares success stories, and uncovers actionable tips to elevate your dental practice to the next level. Get ready to dive deep into the currents of dental business knowledge and experience the dental flow.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Dental Flow podcast. I am your host, Benjamin Suggs. It's great to be back here with you again. I want to spend some time today talking about a topic that we feel is incredibly important to dental practices, and that is new patient phone call handling best practices. This is something that's near and dear to us as a marketing agency. Years ago, probably about 8 years ago, we realized when we were doing marketing for dental practices that we were doing a great job of getting people to call the practice. We could see that in our numbers, but we weren't sure what was happening after that, meaning that we felt like we needed to kind of take a look under the hood and see once someone did call the dental practice, what was happening next. And that was something that we saw was a difference between people who were, very successful with the campaigns we were running and people who were not as successful as a dental practice. And we quickly saw that call handling was a big challenge for a lot of the practices we worked with. So just to share some quick statistics with you, after doing it for a few years, we compiled these numbers and we were pretty shocked by what we saw. The first one, the big one, is that on average, dental practices were missing 40 phone calls per month. That means 40 phone calls were coming in per month and not being answered by the dental practice. 80% of those were missed during office hours. So definitely a troubling number when you think about you're paying people to be there to answer the phone, is that new patients are potentially calling in and nobody's answering the phone. So 20% of those calls actually left a message. That's something we see a lot more of today. People just don't like to leave voicemails anymore. I think we got into this mobile phone age where we just assume that when you call someone, they can see that you called, so they're going to call you back. So we're not going to leave a message. But if you just do the math on that real quick, so let's say your practice is missing an average of 40 phone calls per month. Let's assume that half of those are new patients, or even less. Let's assume that 1/4 of those are new patients. So you got 10 or 12 new patients calling and nobody's answering the phone. They're not going to wait around for you. They rarely leave a message. They're probably just going to go right back to Google or wherever they came from and call the next dentist on the list because you didn't answer the phone. So just think about what 10 extra new patients would do for your dental practice each month to have those folks coming in financially. The other big troubling stat that we saw was that the average call conversion ratio was under 50%. And what we mean by that is that if you have 100 new patients call your practice during the month, less than 50 of those new patients were actually being scheduled on the books. So some of those times there's just going to be reasons where you just can't schedule a new patient. Maybe they are looking for a doctor that takes Medicaid and you don't take it. That's fine. But we do find that most of the time there are additional things that can be done to schedule those new patients into your practice. It's just that the front desk isn't doing it. And we're going to talk about some of those things in this podcast today. And then third, the biggest challenge that we heard listening to, thousands and thousands and thousands of these dental practice phone calls was that the front desk, the folks working at the front desk, tend to have a reluctance to sell for the practice. They tend to just want to answer the phone, answer questions, get off the phone as quickly as possible. And they actually don't want to get into the sales side of dentistry, which unfortunately, or fortunately, however we look at it, is a must. This day and age, people have options. There's a ton of dentists out there. So if someone's calling your practice, you really do need to have your front desk trained on how to sell you as the better option than the other dentists in town. So after doing thousands of these phone calls that we listened to, we put together a training that I'm going to take you through at a very high level right now in a brief podcast. But We do definitely do more of a deep dive with this with our clients. But we developed a framework that we call the 4 E's. And the 4 E's are enthusiasm, empathy, education, and empowerment. So I'm going to walk through each one of those specifically and give you a little bit more information about what each one means. So we'll start with the first one, which is enthusiasm. This one's pretty straightforward. We hear a lot of phone calls for dental practices where there's no excitement on the end of the phone for the practice, meaning this person's called your practice and said they want to become a new patient, and the person on the phone is like, oh, okay, let me get your insurance information. There's no, oh, that's wonderful, we can't wait to welcome you into our practice. So enthusiasm goes a long way into making people feel special. And honestly, if you can make someone feel special, they're going to be much more likely to actually show up for their appointment at your practice. And we even did this once. We had a direct mail campaign that we ran for a dentist where we were tracking the phone calls. And, she got in touch with me a few months later and said, hey, this is working in terms of we're getting a lot of patients, but we're also getting no-shows, people not showing up for their appointment. So we asked them, send us the names of all the people that no-showed. And when we went back and looked at the feedback on those new patient phone calls, we saw that the majority of the no-shows, if you look back at their initial phone call, the feedback that we gave on that phone call was that the front desk person was not overly friendly. They weren't very personable. They were just very methodically, robotically scheduling that patient without any kind of enthusiasm or welcoming or anything like that. So we saw a direct correlation that people who don't feel it are not going to show up. And think about that. Sometimes if you are on the phone with a vendor or someone you want to do business with or don't want to do business with, you have a conversation with them, you may hang up the phone and something just doesn't feel right. And I think that's a lot of what's happening is that people hang up the phone, they scheduled the appointment, but then they feel like something was off. They feel like something wasn't quite right. So some tactics that your front desk can use to really exude enthusiasm on these calls, to give you a few examples, is first and foremost, they have to have the right mindset. I've sat in many dental reception areas waiting to meet with a potential client or a client, and I see it myself. Like I will see that, you'll have two people at the front desk having a conversation with each other, and the phone rings and they look annoyed. They're annoyed that phone is interrupting whatever it was that they were just doing. That's the absolute wrong reaction to have when that phone rings. We coach our practices on, hey, every time that phone rings, there's money on the other end of it. Every time there's an opportunity on the other end of that call that we need to take advantage of. So really before they even answer the phone, we want them to sit up straight, smile, and get into the right state of mind to take that phone call. Enthusiasm in their voice is a big thing. The very monotone drawl that we hear a lot, you can tell that people are just not connecting with it. Just to actually show some enthusiasm about a new patient caller goes a long way. Very important. We have to really teach our front desk folks to understand that this is a job of selling. It's not just a job of answering a phone and answering questions and trying to get off the phone as soon as possible. Their job is to sell. And they have to take that step of not just doing the absolute minimum they can do on the call, but taking the next step to really try and sell that new patient into the practice. Believe in what you're selling. I think it's a big deal if you can really show your folks the type of dentistry you're doing and how you're changing people's lives. They're going to have a more natural enthusiasm on the phone when discussing your practice and you as a doctor. So really trying to get them involved in understanding what you're doing is a big deal, so they believe in what you're selling. Always look to make a connection. We always say this a lot, if you can make a friend on that phone call, that's going to go a lot further than just scheduling an appointment. And, I know you don't want your front desk talking to people for 40 minutes for a new patient phone call, but they can try to make a connection with that person by doing things like using their name, or getting their name early in the call, using it throughout the call, but just being very personable throughout the call. because really at the end of the day, their job is to build rapport with these folks, because rapport is defined as having trust and comfort in somebody. So if I build rapport with that person calling your dental practice on the phone, and they build this trust, build this comfort, they'd be much more likely to schedule and much more likely to show up to that appointment when they have scheduled it. So enthusiasm, very important. That's a first E. The second one is empathy, and this is a big one as well. Empathy just means that you can feel somebody's pain, that you have the ability to experience the feelings of another person. It goes beyond sympathy, which is caring and understanding for the suffering of others. It's important that we show empathy to patients calling the office. So let me just give you an actual example of a call we once heard. So one of our practices received a phone call from a woman who was in the hospital. She was from out of town. She said she came in town because her daughter was in a car wreck and she wanted to be in the hospital with her daughter, but she slipped in the hospital and she busted out a tooth by slipping. She told the story, and the person who took the phone call listened to it. And the only answer that the next question that came out of their mouth was, what type of insurance do you have? So this person just poured their heart out about this horrific situation that they're going through. And the response was, well, do you have insurance, or how are you going to pay us? How's that going to work? You can't do that. The idea of empathy in a phone call, especially a new patient phone call, is to empathize with that person, but also make sure that they understand that you can solve their problem. So, if someone calls and says, I was up all night because my tooth was killing me, I need to get seen today, I need to get something done about this. I understand what it's like to not be able to sleep and to be in pain. We deal with that all the time, but don't worry. You're going to come in here and we're going to fix your problem for you. So I have shown empathy for that person's situation, but also given them the lifeline of, we can solve your pain and solve your problem for you. It's very, very important that we listen to what people are telling us. I think that is very closely tied with empathy. If I'm telling somebody what's going on in my situation with my dental care or whatever it is, and I don't feel like they're really listening to me, or they're just waiting for me to stop talking so they can ask me the next question they're on their list of things they have to ask me, I am not going to feel that there's much empathy in that call at all. And it's going to leave a bad taste in my mouth about coming to that practice. So number 2 is empathy. Number 3, educating the caller. So we have listened to enough dental calls to know that the number one question that people ask is price. When someone calls your dental practice, the first thing they're going to ask is like, hey, I need a dental crown. How much is it? Now, I've had some clients that get annoyed with that question. They hate it when people ask them a price. And they say, well, it's medical care. Why are you asking about the price? But the fact is, people don't know what else to ask. People don't understand what else. I mean, it's just like if I know nothing about building a deck. I can't do it, so I need to hire someone to do that. So if I call someone to ask them about building a deck on my house, I'm going to say, how much is it? That's the only thing I know to ask. I don't know to ask like, hey, what kind of wood are you going to use? What kind of synthetics or natural, or, how many decks have you built? These are not questions that I know as an uneducated consumer to ask. So I'm going to ask about price. That's always where the mind's going to go. So the important thing is that your front desk understands that, they need to take that price question and then they need to pivot into what's more important. So if I call your practice and say, hey, I need a crown, how much is one? They should look at that as an opportunity to say, okay, well, I can definitely give you that information. Let me just ask you a few more questions about what's going on. And then they can give me information that might be more valuable than the price. Because at the end of the day, people are not so concerned about price. It's just what they're more concerned about is value. So they want to know that the money they're spending is going to give value back to them. And that's what we want to do, is communicate value beyond price. So if I was in that call situation, I would say, well, let me tell you a little bit about how we do our crowns. Maybe you talk about CERIC, or maybe you talk about where your crowns are made. our crowns are made in our Syrup machine, or they're made in this local laboratory right down the street. All of these things are important that that person doesn't know these things exist. They don't know that the quality of materials is important. They don't know that they can have it done in one appointment instead of two. They just know to ask about price. So it's the same way if I called a car dealership and asked them, hey, I want that high-end Mercedes, top of the line. How much is it? They're never just going to say, that's $80,000, sir, and stop talking. They're going to say, well, that costs $80,000. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. You're going to get oil changes included. You're going to feel like a stud driving around in this Mercedes. The car is great. The value. They're going to communicate the value to me beyond just the price. So it's very important that our front desk think about this when that price question inevitably happens. It's going to happen a lot. So some other things that they can talk about with your practice, or something that we rarely hear, which drives me crazy, which is just praising you, the doctor. Honestly, I can't tell you how seldomly we hear a front desk person just say, oh, well, let me just tell you, Dr. Smith is the best crown dentist in this town. Dr. Smith is the best at veneers. Dr. Smith is the best at, we have the most gentle hygienist in town for dental cleanings. Praise the doctors, praise the hygienists, praise the practice. We rarely hear it, but when you do hear it, it makes a huge impact on that caller, because you have this person selling you and selling your practice to this person, new patient that's calling. Talk about your materials, talk about your financing, talk about your convenience, talk about your reviews. These are all things that people will want to hear about, but they just don't know to ask about it. They're uneducated. So we have to educate that person on what they should be asking about when they call a dental office beyond price. The next one, and the last E that we talk about with our practices, is empowerment. And what we mean by that is empowering that caller to make a decision. So we hear a lot of phone calls where the new patient calls and they ask questions. And the front desk does a very admirable job of answering those questions like they're supposed to. They answer a question, answer the question, answer the question. Yes, we do accept that insurance. Yes, we do have that. And then there's this awkward silence where nothing's happening. And eventually you kind of hear the person say, all right, well, thank you. I'll call you guys back. Click. Call over. And we can track that. We rarely ever see those people call back. They almost never call back. So one of the things that we really push our clients to do is to really take control of the call and close the sale. And there's a couple things I want to talk about. The most important one that we talk about is you should never let a call end without offering a time. So if I'm a new patient caller and I call and I ask questions and then there's an uncomfortable silence, that's where your front desk person needs to say, you know what? It looks like I have an appointment available for you, 10 a.m. Thursday morning. Let's go ahead and get you scheduled. Now, we used to coach years ago, we used to coach our clients to ask, would you like to schedule a dental appointment? But we moved on from that, because if you ask a question, you're just going to get a yes or no answer. Would you like to schedule? No. Okay. Why don't you want to schedule? But really, if you push them, people will be more likely to do it. So instead of asking, just say, I have an appointment available for you Thursday at 10 a.m. It's interesting that we kind of learned that from dental hygienists, because when we would listen to phone calls in a dental practice, you would hear the front desk, and then every now and then they get really busy. So the hygienist would jump on the phone call and answer the phone because it's ringing in the back. And the hygienist did not play around. Like there was no, they would ask, okay, so, you're having, okay, here's the deal. You need to come in and you need to see us. Like, let's get you on the schedule as soon as possible. And if the person would say, okay, because this is a medical person giving them medical advice that they want to follow. So they were almost forcefully like, you need to get your butt in here and you need to be seen. And people would do it almost every time. So we realized like we need to be a little bit more forceful in empowering these people to make a decision. People need help. They will spin around, think about it. They need us to take them like the horse to water to make that decision and book an appointment. Some other tactical things that fall into this, empowering people to make a decision. So one is when people make objections. So price is usually a huge one, obviously. If I say, how much is a crown? And you say $1,500. And I say, oh my God, that's so expensive. That's like crazy expensive. I can't afford that. So one of the things we ask our guys to do is never disagree with somebody on the phone. Don't disagree and say, nah, $1,500 is not expensive. You should see what the dentist down the road charges for this. But instead, we want to align and pivot. And what I mean by align and pivot is you align with their point of view, but then you try to pivot them away into a more productive conversation. If I say, oh my God, $1,500, that's absurd. That's way too high a price. Then you want to say something like, yes, sir, I know the cost of crowns can be expensive, but it's also important that we do it right and use the right quality materials to ensure that you don't need a new crown in just a few years. We want to make sure it lasts a long time for you. So now they didn't disagree and say I'm crazy for thinking that's expensive, but they explain why it's probably a little bit more expensive. They explain because you could go get a cheaper crown, half the price, and it might fall out of your mouth in 2 years. So they align with me, but then they pivot me where they want me to go. Another thing we teach is called the law of reciprocation, where if your front desk person says something like this, hey, we're completely booked on Tuesday, but I really want to help you and get you in here. The doctor doesn't like when I do this, but I think I can squeeze you in on Tuesday. So I have just given the impression that I'm doing something nice for this person, this potential new patient. And by the law of reciprocation, they feel the need to reciprocate, which usually means they want to book the appointment because I've gone out of my way now to make an exception to try and get them on the schedule at a time that's convenient for them. So they're more likely to say, oh, okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's get me on the schedule. Creating urgency is always a big thing. If you say something like, hey, I just had a cancellation for an 11 a.m. appointment tomorrow, I can reserve that time for you, but we need to go ahead and do it now. If you make people feel as if they're going to lose out on an opportunity, they're much more likely to take it. We use this a lot on our dental websites where we say things like, only valid for the next 30 days, only valid for this month, things like that. So even if we're running that special for 4 months, we'll still position it as a 1 month deal because we're trying to create urgency because more often than not, people, the thought of losing out on something is more powerful of a motivator than the thought of winning something. So we want them to get that feeling that they need to take this action. They need to go ahead and book that appointment. And then also you can do something that we call test closing in sales, which is assume the appointment. So if you're in a conversation and they're asking a bunch of questions, is just say something like, oh, you know what? Let me go ahead and get your name and your insurance information. So you're kind of testing the close to get this appointment done. And what that does is they either say, sure, okay, yeah, let's do that. And then you're halfway down to getting the schedule. Or they say, well, I'm not sure yet. And then you can actually address whatever their issue is. So by test closing, you're getting them to tell you either yes or tell you why they want to say no. And then you have an opportunity to address that. So you can make sure that that call doesn't end with you not knowing why that person chose not to appoint with your practice. What was it that you were doing differently or what they didn't like or they didn't understand that we could help out with? It could be something as, they're hesitant because they think it's going to be too expensive. Well, then you can talk about financing. There's all kinds of things that you can talk about to make them feel more comfortable in booking that appointment. But I mentioned this once, and I'll just say it again. In this section of empowerment, the most important thing to take away from this is never, ever let a call end without offering an appointment time. If that one change was made in every dental practice in the land, I'm telling you, there would be a lot more booked appointments because a lot more people would be scheduling if we weren't just allowing them to end the call and drift off back into the Google universe and never to be heard from again. So make sure your front desk understands that. Never, ever end a call without offering an appointment time. So that is it. That is the 4 E's. And like I said, I just did that at a high level. We have a more in-depth training that we do in our agency that has more information. But I think if you kind of think about that framework and think about how you would sit down and talk to your own front desk about implementing these types of things, you can see a big difference in your conversion rate of new patient callers. And that is really what, at the end of the day, what we want. If you're already spending all this money on marketing, how are you going to maximize the return on investment from it is to make sure that when people do reach out to your practice, you're able to schedule them and have them show up for that appointment. So I hope this was helpful. As always, if you could take a minute to wherever you get your podcast to either rate us, subscribe, follow, whatever your podcast platform does. We really would appreciate it. Again, this is Benjamin Suggs, and thank you again for joining us on the Dental Flow podcast. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for this Dental Flow podcast episode. If you enjoyed today's discussion and wish to stay updated on future episodes, please like, subscribe, and share the podcast with colleagues and friends. For more insights and discussions on dental marketing, we encourage you to continue riding the Dental Flow wave and tune into the next episode. Keep on smiling, learning, and flowing with the Dental Flow podcast.